Good afternoon, everybody. It is Tuesday the 10th of October. If I may just have a personal note for a moment, I'd just like to wish my sister Sarah a very happy birthday. And I know you're watching this, so I hope to see you in Salford soon when I'm next up there. Thank you for your patience, everybody else. Where to begin? Vanitas vanitatum omnia vanitas. Some of you may recognise the opening music, some of you may recognise those words. That a more common expression would be vanity of vanities, all is vanity. From the book of Ecclesiastes, the preacher says. It's an interesting idea, and one that I think merits a little more looking into. The Latin word vanus, from which we get the English word vanity, comes from the idea of being empty. So vanity is a pride where there is nothing there to be proud of, a pride in yourself when there is no pride there. And that nothingness has a very deep, touches a very deep nerve in all of us, I think. There is I've noticed reading some of my magazines and online, and possibly because of the time of year it is, that we're seeing more skulls being incorporated into designs at the moment. I myself have crocheted someone a skull shawl that I showed in one of my main podcast videos earlier this year. And I've noticed little skull amigurumis, and a number of mainstream news outlets, magazine outlets, talking about memento mori, remembrance of death. And I'm just intrigued by the process of thought that goes into this. In particular, where the idea of memento mori came from. Because it seems to me that there are a number of ways of looking at this. I know that Socrates wrote that philosophy is nothing else other than, what was it? About dying or being dead. So it's about the process by which life ends and what happens after that. And there's as ever with these pithy sayings, a degree of truth about that. But it seems very morbid and very negative, and that doesn't sound like the kind of thing that would inspire somebody to pick up a crochet hook and crochet a skull, nor would you want to be giving such a thing as a gift to somebody else. On Ash Wednesday, it is the common practice for the priest to bless ashes and then apply them in a cross on the forehead of each of the faithful, with the words, "Remember, O man, that thou art dust, and unto dust thou shalt return." And both literally and figuratively, that's absolutely true. And memento mori could stop just at that sense that death, like taxation, is one of the inevitable things in life. But again, it's not a very uplifting or positive message to be given. And then I was struck by lots of Renaissance figures like Erasmus, Thomas More, and others in that early 15th and late 15th century milieu of the Renaissance start to pose for portraits with a skull on their desk or in their hand. And it's only the top half of the skull without the lower jaw. And it's a very somber look. It's, I think, meant to represent the idea of being a serious thinker, a serious person who ponders the mysteries of life and the universe and everything, to quote Douglas Adams. And the answer isn't 42. And it's interesting because the papal coronation of 1409 of Alexander VI who was a Borgia, began a practice which went all the way through until as late as 1963 with the final papal coronation of Pope Paul VI. Part of the coronation ceremony was that the Pope was carried on what's known as a seda gestatoria, which is a chair that's on a platform that's carried by 4 men on each side at the front and each side at the back. And the Pope is carried from the presbytery, the sacristy, through the congregation in the nave, and is taken to the high altar where the coronation ceremony takes place. And 3 times along the... and as part of this whole process, I should say that there is a papal gentleman carrying a huge ostrich feather fan at the front and the rear. So it was very much taken from the kind of imperial processions of later Rome and the Byzantium Empire. And there was one of it was actually the papal MC, carried in his hand a silver or brass stick, attached to which at the end was a piece of smouldering flax. And 3 times during the procession would come to a halt. The MC would kneel before the Pope-elect and would say, Sancte Pater, sic transit gloria mundi. Holy Father, so passes the glory of the world. The idea being, of course, that whilst the Pope has absolute power as the monarch of the Papal States then, and as the absolute monarch of the Vatican City-State now, he had the temporal power was his to acquire, dispose, and every judgment came from the Holy Father himself as king. But at the same time, because of Thou art Peter, and upon this rock I shall build my church, and Jesus gave Peter the power to bind things on earth and bind things in heaven. So there was an absolute spiritual power as well. I say absolute, it's absolute when properly applied. So in fact, it's not absolute because you can't declare something that isn't true to be true, for example. And anyway, we'll not go into all of that. But the point was, during this ceremony where the Pope is about to be invested with all of these absolute powers, he's also taken aside and reminded, you will die, this will end, you will have nothing except, and this is the point, there was another tradition which people who, actually before I go on to that, the Sic Transit Gloria Mundi, I do want to mention this, reminded me of a poem by Emily Dickinson, which was I've actually got it written down here, it was actually a Valentine. And I just wanted to read it because I actually really like the poem. So, Sic Transit Gloria Mundi, how doth the busy bee, dum vivimus vivamus, I stay my enemy. Dum vivimus vivamus means while we are alive, let us live. So don't just breathe, do something kind of thing. But I love that sound, dum vivimus vivamus. It's almost like a bee bzz, 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 buzzing away. Anyway, I just wanted to share that. It's not really ad rem this. I've made a few notes because this is quite a complex and in-depth tour of the idea. Some of you may recognise the opening tune, which is part of a bigger work by Camille Saint-Saëns, which is the Danse Macabre. And this was an art form in sculpture, carving, and painting and engraving from about 1420, 1430 onwards, where churches were decorated and with skeletons who were engaged in the dance of death with the living. So there would be human beings, and they would often be made to represent kings and popes and important local burgesses and that kind of thing. And they would, interspersed amongst all these recognizably powerful people, were these skeletons. The idea being, pretty much like with the Pope, so will pass the glory of the world. When you die, you will be just like us, and the only thing you will have is what you have done. And at the same time as all of this, in about 1412, Thomas à Kempis was writing his Imitation of Christ, and he also says, "How quickly passes the glory of the world." And there seems to have been at the beginning of the Renaissance, a kind of rebirth of this memento mori idea, a much more profound memento mori than Socrates, whose philosophy didn't really veer off in that direction that much anyway. But there's a much more profound reflection and soteriology, theology of salvation, attached to the memento mori. And the tradition continues into the 16th and 17th century, but it continues mostly in the art of the Dutch painters, and in particular in the still life genre. So it moves away from a skull being represented alongside a powerful man as a reminder of how deep a thinker and how solemn a person they were, and it becomes more a reflection on the transitory nature of life. So you'll often see flowers or candles burning alongside a skull, reminding us that one day the candle will burn out, one day the petals will fall, and you, like the skull in the middle, will be a mere shadow of your former self. And that brings us really right up into the modern era, because Damien Hirst very famously took a platinum cast of a skull and encrusted it with just under 9,000 diamonds and sold this for a lot of money, and entitled the piece "For the Love of God," which, being Damien Hirst, is not a pious title but a rather ironic title. And it fits in with the YOLO attitude, you only live once, and the adoption of the memento mori from Socrates by the New Stoics. There is a fundamental nihilism that underpins such ideas, that you only live once means you only get one crack of the whip, so you might as well do what you want to do now, because there will be nothing hereafter except the long, cold darkness. And that's a very nihilistic and negative, and for me very depressing thought. The long, cold darkness. There is no point to life, and it ends. I'm not convinced, for me, that that's a positive outlook on life. So the memento mori ties in with another 17th century devotion called the bon amours, which means the happy death. And it's not about... Both of these devotions are not about the morbidity of life, that one day we will be dead, so what on earth is the point? It is a case of one day you will be dead and unable to do anything good for your fellow man, so do it now while you have the chance. Clothe yourselves in the good works. Leave a legacy of positive memory, and pray for people who will pray for your soul. And for Catholics, there are the four last things. There is death, judgment, heaven, and hell. And it can often sound like you only do good things to avoid going to hell. And in a literal sense, that is true. You do good things in order to avoid going to hell. But in fact, there is a better reason for doing good things, which is because you have embraced the goodness. You want to be the better person. You want to be better in yourself, and you want to be the best version of yourself every day. And for me, that's what the memento mori really is. It's every day might be my last, so today I want to be the best version of myself that I can be, for myself and for everybody else around me. And what's striking about the memento mori and the bon amours is that this is not limited, in fact, to Catholic theology or even Christian theology, because the Puritans and evangelicals have a similar sense of living today as if it's your last, and so doing the right thing. But this is a common phenomenon in Islam and Buddhism. I haven't found it in other major religions, but it probably exists. I just haven't looked hard enough. But certainly those two other major world faith systems have a very similar approach to how we embrace our frailty and make it the motivating factor for our goodness. And so I think that's probably the positive message that I would want to leave with this podcast today. We're coming up to Halloween. I know Halloween is a bigger celebration in America and Canada than it is here in the UK. I've always celebrated Halloween. We bobbed apples and all that kind of thing. But the dressing up, I can see it's fun, but it just isn't part of my cultural background at all to do that. But for me, the bigger part of the celebration of Halloween is celebrating All Saints' Day the following day. And the All Saints that we celebrate on the 1st of November are not the kind of NFL player level saints. It's the Sunday League, Little League saints, the ordinary men and women whom history does not recall, but who led good and faithful lives, were the best version of themselves they could be every day, and are enjoying their reward for a good and faithful service to God and to man. And I think if I leave you with that message, then we don't any longer have to be afraid of death, but perhaps can use it to help us be the best version of ourselves. So on that interesting note, I will leave you for today, and I will speak to you again tomorrow. So bye.